You can use this one design principle on your designs to totally change the way you design. You can resolve problems on your designs and to simply feel like a design boss. For example, right here. This is a double-page spread from a furniture brochure design. Now, it might look slightly off to you for some reason, but can you see why? Today's video is going to look at the principle of proportion, which is size in relation to something else. It is really important to understand this principle fully and to see how it can actually change your graphic designs right before your very eyes. The reason this design looks slightly chaotic and not very professional is simply because the imagery and the textual elements do not consider proportion. And so, to help you, I've created a few easy to follow rules that you can apply onto any design that will help incorporate the principle of proportion effectively. Firstly, when adding imagery onto your designs, consider using the similar aspect ratio. To perfectly illustrate this, let's consider the context of a portfolio website design. Adhering to a consistent aspect ratio for displayed images, example 3:2, will ensure a unified and aesthetically pleasing presentation. This consistency prevents visual distortion and it creates a cohesive visual narrative that aligns with the design style. It adds to the unity and the fluidity of the design, and let's face it, it just looks better, right? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, this principle is pretty simple, and you'd be right in thinking that actually. But a lot of graphic designers go wrong by forgetting or underestimating the fundamentals and the basics of graphic design. And the next rule is going to help with just that. Let's say you're designing a magazine layout. What does almost every single magazine layout require? Ding ding ding, a grid system. This helps arrange text and images in a structured format. But how does this play into the principle of proportion? Well, for instance, a 2-column grid can actually be employed to organize articles, images, and captions consistently throughout the publication, and that is with uniform in size and layout. We can use grid modules to maintain proper proportion of things, which enhances readability and visual cohesion, and this creates an organized and just a professional magazine layout. And later, we're going to see how and when we can break these rules. But the next rule to keep in mind exclusively talks about typography. Now, if you're working on a brand identity design, but this can apply to almost anything, establishing typography proportion standards ensures a consistent and a recognizable visual language throughout the brand identity and the branding system, which is uber important. For example, a luxury brand might adopt a serif font for its logo in the headlines, and they maintain this choice and this size across brand collateral. The consistency of typography contributes to brand cohesion and recognition. If the brand deviated from the size of the font in different situations, the brand recall would be less than ideal. And this is why when you work with a professional brand or professional client, they give you a guideline or a style guide on how to use their branding materials. It often states that you cannot change the size or dimensions of the logo and the text, and this is exactly why proportion matters to graphic designers. When considering typography, it is important to think about hierarchy as well. Now, I like the 3-level rule of hierarchy, and this is where the typography which is the largest is the main importance. The secondary level will be anywhere from 50% to 80% smaller than the first, and then the third level is often just the body text. When using this rule, keep your proportions equal and consistent throughout the entire design, and it will work out for you. The next rule is really important for UI and UX design, but it can be applied to print design as well. Now, it pertains to call to actions and icon buttons. Basically, you should be looking to standardize the size, the style, and the placement of your call to actions and the buttons throughout a design. In the design of an e-commerce website, maintaining uniformity in the design of the Add to Cart button is crucial. Consistent button size, color, and placement across the product pages create a seamless and intuitive shopping experience for the users of the website. This standardized design element facilitates user interaction and streamlines the purchasing process. If a designer forgets to include standard proportions of buttons and call to actions, the design will look very unprofessional. However, it's also important to get the size correct in relation to other elements on the design. You really do not want these buttons or call to actions to dominate the design in terms of their size. Standard buttons don't need to stand out as much as CTAs, but they can both be relatively small or even the same size. Only CTAs utilize color and shape to stand out more so. It's all about getting that sweet spot between the CTA and the normal buttons and in relation to everything else on your design. And here are some hard numbers on achieving just that. Primary buttons and CTAs are larger than secondary buttons, often around 1.5 to 2 times the height and width of standard text elements on the design. And you can strategically place these to draw attention, typically below or beside important elements. Secondary buttons are smaller than primary buttons, but large enough for easy interaction, and they're often similar or slightly larger than standard text elements. And these need to be placed logically within the content or the interface. But every rule or every principle is meant to be broken, right? First, you master the rules or the fundamentals, and then later you learn how to break them and when. Let's talk about that. Situation 1, where you can and should break principles of proportion, is on focal points. Now, say you're designing a poster that promotes a music festival. You might want to emphasize the headlining artist's photo or imagery by making it much larger than other elements on the design. But also within that, you might create different proportions of the focal points, and here we can see 3 people in the focal point as an example. Breaking proportion in this case directs the viewer's attention to the focal point, creating a visual hierarchy and conveying the significance of the featured artist. This adds a dynamic impact across the entire design. But what about this magazine design here? How or why has the breakaway from the normal proportion been used? The designer has used proportion in a non-conformal way to give a sense of tension on the design. This design is not meant to look like it conforms. The purpose of the design is to be jarring. Just look how the text is often sat very close to an image, or how the text bleeds right over imagery or even across a double page. When a design's message is based around disorder, then we can use principles in the way of disorder as well. But it can also be used to evoke a sense of wonder and mystique. Now, this would be very appropriate on the cover of a surrealist novel, just as one example. In fantasy themes, designers might intentionally distort proportions to create a surreal atmosphere. The deviation from reality can enhance the fantastical nature of the content. Again, it's another form of disorder, but this time it's less jarring and more curious and more mystical.